Pharma companies are very familiar with submitting national HTA dossiers with the goal of achieving reimbursement in key European markets. In 2025, however, the rules of the game will change for good, as the long-dreaded EU Joint Clinical Assessment process finally goes live on the 1st of January 2025. Expectations for the EU JCA process are low, as many industry experts fear that the process will be yet another bureaucratic hurdle that stands in the way of bringing innovative new medicine to patients, which causes concerns for people working in the pharma industry who will develop the required materials for the assessment. To ease some of that concern, I'll break down everything you need to know about the Joint Clinical Assessment process going into 2025, so that you can be as best prepared as possible. That's why in today's video, I'll cover questions like what is the JCA and what's in scope, what are the process steps and the timelines, and what are the challenges and key considerations to look out for. So what is the JCA? At its core, the JCA is an effort to harmonize aspects of the HTA processes across Europe. Right now, pharma companies and medical device manufacturers have to submit evidence individually in each of the 27 EU markets. The JCA builds on the idea that at least some of that assessment can be done centrally, which is reflected in the aims of the EU Health Technology Assessment Regulation, which was enacted by the European Parliament in 2022. This regulation aims to standardize the clinical assessment of medicines and high-risk medical devices across Europe, avoiding duplication of work, and to improve access of innovative health technologies and strengthen the quality of health technology assessment in Europe. With these aims in mind, the JCA intends to strengthen HTA in Europe by providing an assessment report which will act as a universal information source for relative treatment effects, safety, and other clinical parameters agreed in the scoping process, which I will discuss in more detail shortly. Importantly, this JCA report will not replace the need to submit national HTA dossiers. A common concern with the JCA is that countries fear that decision autonomy will be taken away from them. This is not the case though, as clarified in a statement by a former member of the EUHTAnet HTA consortium, which expressed that the JCA does not decide how each member state uses its money, but instead it is intended as an objective assessment of evidence that can be leveraged in each national body's decision-making process. This means that the JCA is not an appraisal in itself, as opposed to, let's say, the AMNOG appraisal process in Germany, for example. That's why local agencies will reserve the right to draw their own conclusions on relative efficacy, cost-effectiveness, and safety. Legally, EU member states will be required to give every JCA report due consideration, whatever that is supposed to mean, and each state may request additional information relevant to their market. As mentioned at the start of this video, the JCA is projected to go live on January 1st, 2025. However, the JCA will take a staggered approach. So in 2025, only oncology and ATMP products will fall under the remit of the JCA. During the first extension phase in 2028, the JCA process will be extended to include products with an orphan drug designation in its remit, while finally including all centrally authorized medical products in the EU by 2030. The JCA kicks off with the scoping process that I've mentioned earlier, which is specified in the EUHTAnet 21 guidelines. As part of the scoping process, the manufacturer will submit elements of their EMA application, including proposed summary of product characteristics and the clinical overview. Based on this information, assessors will prepare a proposal for the assessment scope using the PICO framework. PICO stands for Population, Intervention, Comparator, and Outcomes, which has the aim of specifying the JCA framework for assessment and the evidence requirements the manufacturer will need to satisfy. Crucially, all 27 EU member states will get to fill out a PICO survey, allowing them to identify national needs for the joint assessment. This invokes the potential for a high quantity of PICOs to be requested during the scoping, as there is not really a cap on the number of final PICOs that can be requested. Pharma companies see this as a big issue, given that the definition of standard of care and patient populations are likely to vary across member states, and so there is a risk of an unmanageable workload for manufacturers. Concerns about the high workload for drug companies are further fueled by the fact that the JCA process timelines are synchronized with the EMA marketing authorization assessments and therefore start very early in the product life cycle. As you can see from this figure, the JCA process starts on the same day as the EMA marketing authorization procedure, with a JCA dossier submission before final CHMP opinion. This constitutes another risk, as aspects of the PICO criteria may change following CHMP opinion, which would cause the whole JCA process to start all over again. Not only do manufacturers need to fear a restart of the JCA process, but they also have to worry that there will be limited opportunities to interact with the JCA assessors. As I've mentioned earlier, the JCA process is not an appraisal, and hence no reimbursement decisions will be made because of this process, which is why contact is believed to be limited to requests of missing clinical evidence if not included in the JCA dossier. This is really ironic, as despite all intentions to avoid duplication of efforts, which the EU JCA set out to address, it looks like the challenges the new process brings are more likely to increase rather than reduce the workload for pharma companies. In defense of the JCA process, a former chairman of the EUHTAnet HTA Executive Committee argued that pharma companies will have access to smaller countries, such as Eastern European countries, that are not usually targeted as a priority for those pharma companies, as these countries will be covered through the JCA. Again, this sounds a little bit like an empty promise to me, given that the JCA process is not really designed to give reimbursement decisions. In practice, it will be up to the smaller countries and how they will respond to the clinical results presented in the JCA report. Who knows if the smaller non-HTA countries will act on the JCA report, if the outcome isn't legally binding and forcing them to take action on the reimbursement of the new drugs. Even though the EU Joint Clinical Assessment is approaching rapidly in 2025, and despite all the attention it has got in the HER world over the last couple of years, national HTA and reimbursement procedures are not going to be replaced anytime soon. National HTA processes will stay relevant for a long time to come, so if you want to learn more about these national market access procedures, why not check out my video on the NICE appraisal process, which explains how HTA is done in England. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.